what's the council? Oh, Paul, would you just open this?
Can do. Tēnā whakatau te whare mihi hiri anō tātou ngā mātua ngā tuku. Nā moka puna ingoa nei kia koutou. Mai neke mai hei awhi hei arahi e tū. Ui o te atu. Nei, tau ana te manaakitanga rungi a mātou, kia tau kāro I pāna ki te wai, reira, e tūturu whakawhiti maua kia tina.
Thank you very much, Paul. And welcome, Max. Max, would you like to just come up at the table rather than sitting back there? And welcome, and thank you for coming to Rotorua for this meeting. And I'll head back to the Mayor, and then we'll head back to Craig.
Yeah, kia ora, and just want to acknowledge you, Max. I know you come from the great bustling metropolis of Rotorua, and it has been a real pleasure to work alongside you in your former capacity as Mayor, but also understanding the level of detail that you in a leadership role had to go through in the Waikato region, where you also have a number of smaller communities such as your own. So as we navigate this with our local Waters Done Well group, it's really valuable to be able to get a bit of an update from you personally to our whole council. So we do really appreciate you being here with us today and look forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Kia ora again, councillors. I'll just pick up there. Kia koe, Paul, for the karakia. Thank you. The last time we spoke on Local Waters Done Well or Water Service Delivery Plan was back in the induction stage as a council in your new triennium. Things have moved along a little bit since then, but this workshop was always set as a one to pick up where we've gotten to and go a little bit over some of the previous decisions, but not spending too much time on that, but looking at what the working program now is and how the big movement since we last spoke is the Waters Working Group is up and running, and they're up to they'll soon be having their fourth meeting, which will be in Kawerau in a couple of weeks, and the heads of agreement was signed off with the councils of Poriki, Whakatane, Kawerau and ourselves. So that's been sort of the major movement since then. And then now we're at the stage where the actual program of work is beginning to unwind, and we have some people from Martin Jenkins on the line today who are helping us with the investigation and study, and obviously Max is here to talk on his involvement and what some of his learnings have been through the progress with Waikato Waters Done Well, as Mayor Tapsell said. And we've also got some representatives of our staff with our engagement and communications team who will talk about the approach that we have outlined that we want some feedback on, just to make sure we're covering all the bases. So the workshop purpose is essentially that. And I think, Rob, you got the key. Can you just go to, that's an outline of where we're going today. If you can go to the next one. I've just sort of overviewed that very quickly. And that's really where we've been since those decisions were made. So the working group have been engaged and have been meeting. You can go to the next one. This slide you'll be familiar with. It's the back to the end, wherever the end is. But we're in that second box now, going towards considering the third box. Across, I'll take this one as read because we sent these out in advance, but that's just a high level of what the working group has been up to and where they're at. And I think just from my point of view, we've been sharing those, the executive summaries of those minutes to you as we get them from the various councils up post the meetings. That's so you can stay up with what's going on. Go to the next one. And this is this slide you would have seen back in, I think it was November. We're down in the February-March space right now, and it's really the grumpy bit where we start to really map out how we're going to investigate, what we're investigating, and what options you require for your decision making. Could you go next one? And that's it as a picture. I think there's nothing that is probably unknown to you, but I probably should just note this workshop is being recorded, so this might be the first time members of the public will actually get to see this piece of work in that way. So that's where we are. EM Workshop 1, and there's 2 more to come through this process. And I think for me right now, that's actually time for Max to have a bit of a talk about his journey, unless councillors have got any questions on where we've been and just some of that work that's been ongoing, or if any of the working group members want to comment at this point for your colleagues. Is anything?
Thank you.
Max, yeah.
Kia ora tātou, ko Max Baxter toku ingoa, ko Waipa toku awa, ko Kakapuku toku onga. It's a pleasure to be here. I actually thought I was out of local government after 12 years as Mayor of Rotorua and 3 years as a councillor prior to that. During that journey, I also spent 7 years as Chair of Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. And my other involvement outside of that was along with the water reforms. I was working in a working group with Tamata Arawai on rural water supplies and drinking water standards. And then when Local Water Done Well came along, I also was in a working group with Tamata Arawai there as well. But probably more importantly, why I am here is because as one of the mayors of the 7 councils involved in Waikato Water, and one of the smaller councils in the Waikato, we made some pretty big decisions to join up with those other councils to form Waikato Waters Limited. So moving on to the next slide. That's my intention. The purpose of this discussion, why we're here, to explore delivery options beyond immediate financial modelling. And I say that because we always seem to go back to the finances at the end of the day, but this is about a discussion which is talking about long-term sustainability and water service delivery, to consider long-term impacts on the ratepayers, our communities, the council sustainability, mana whenua relationships, and to support informed, future-focused decision-making. We've got highlights here. This is not about winning a model, it's about choosing the right model for your region. From my perspective, the experience that shapes my advice, former Mayor of Rotorua District, navigated the establishment of Waikato Waters Limited, and I've experienced the political complexity, and trust me, this is never going to be smooth running having this discussion, even when Rotorua Council voted on joining the CCO, that wasn't unanimous. There's 3 councillors that didn't agree with it. One of those councillors is now the Mayor. So again, there's that complexity where, and I'm getting the feedback that he got cold feet even a couple of weeks ago, but has now realised that we're part of this entity and that he's got, as much as it wouldn't have been his journey, we're there now and he's got to go with that. So again, the political complexity is always going to be huge. The community resistance and support. So you will get feedback, and this is where the comms becomes really, really important. Mana whenua engagement for Rotorua, like all of these councils that you're talking about here, this is paramount. And for us, and I can only speak for Rotorua, when I became Mayor of Rotorua, our relationship with Maniopoto was virtually non-existent. And so I spent 12 years trying to build up a relationship, and the relationship from really the grassroots. And trust me, our journey wasn't always smooth. And the biggest learning for me was when we start making decisions or start writing documents, and at that stage we haven't involved mana whenua. And you guys will know this full well, the mistakes you've probably made as a council in the past, where you think we're partway through a journey and go, hey, what do you think of this? And already you're on the back foot. And that back foot, don't go there. Make this a legacy right from the beginning, that the engagement is genuine and meaningful from the get-go. Governance redesign, that's a really interesting part of it, because everything is going to change if you choose to go with the CCO. Long-term infrastructure planning and pressures. Looking through your water services delivery plan, I mean, first off, compliments to the team. Andrew, and the work that's been done there, because there's a heck of a lot of work that went in on staff's behalf to get that across the line as you did, but it's still You can still see some vulnerabilities in there, as I can with every council across New Zealand. My role today is totally independent, so politics aren't a part of my discussion, okay? I'm unbiased. I come here with no opinions in that regard. I am grounded in lived experience and focused on long-term resilience. Next slide. The strategic context. Water reform is not just about infrastructure reform. It affects community identity, democratic accountability, financial sustainability, intergenerational equity, relationships with mana whenua, and council viability. I'll go back to that first one. Community identity is what we start getting really afraid of. And I think about where we've worked with Waikato Waters Limited, that the community still will have an identity. There'll be a working group that'll be taking their perspective to the governance board, so everyone has an identity. And I think about in Rotorua district, we've got a community which some of you will know, Kawhia on the coast, population of about 300. The biggest voice in our district is Kawhia. So don't ever think the small person's going to be forgotten. They will always speak the loudest. In terms of financial sustainability, that's huge, but it is only just part of the equation. The question is, which model is cheaper today. It is which model protects communities for the next 30 to 50 years and beyond. As elected members, what we tend to do is we tend to look back and go, hey, but we did it this way. This is what has kept our identity where we are. Why are we changing? Where you've got to turn is forget about the next election, forget about whether you're going to get voted in on the decision you make. What do we want to be looking at in 50 and 100 years' time? What do our mokapuna want to be looking at? What is going to be the sustainable model, not just for Rotorua, but for your region and for the motu as a whole? Where are we looking forward, and how would you have this sustainable intergenerational delivery of infrastructure and services going forward? The two core pathways. Option one is standalone council delivery, and look, your water services delivery plan indicates that you can go alone. It means the council retains full ownership and operational responsibility. Option two is that collaborative multi-council entity, shared services model, or CCO across Rotorua and Eastern Bay of Plenty. So this is what, over the next year, before you go out for consultation on this is the discussion that you're going to be having in-house and sharing with your other councils in this region. Next slide, please. The standalone model, the potential advantages: a strong local control, clear political accountability, community familiarity and comfort, direct responsiveness to local issues, and retention of identity. The potential risks are limited borrowing headroom, and we've seen where the headroom is. I mean, we're not pushing any limits here at this stage, but I think about natural disaster around the place, how that potentially impacts on where we are. And I'll talk about Rotorua in the recovery stage from a state of emergency from a weather event only 10 days ago. And, on our farm, we had 300 mil of rain overnight and 340 mil all up. Fortunately, our water drained away and we didn't have the hillsides that slipped, but I look at the hills that slipped, and you would have probably been in discussion with Waipa in terms of the reservoir that feeds Parongia Township. That reservoir has now been drained, and they're talking about, don't quote me on this, but the first figures I heard is $20 million to repair that reservoir, which is the key source of supply for Parongia Township. At the moment, Parongia is being fed by Te Awamutu, and they've got to work out other ways to supply that water going forth. So that's a dam reservoir that's actually in Rotorua district up Parongia Mountain. So we never believe that we're safe from natural disaster and that we may have big infrastructure costs going forward. And where do we need that financial headroom going forward? Smaller scale equals higher per household pressure costs, and we've seen the level of affordability with water service delivery and kind of crossing that threshold at the moment. Vulnerability to regulatory change, and climate resilience, cost borne alone, which I just talked about. Next set, collaborative model, thank you. Potential advantages: scale of efficiencies, stronger balance sheet, greater regional leverage, specialist capability, procurement power, infrastructure risks shared. Potential risk: perceived loss of control, community resistance, governance complexity, risk of disconnection from local identity, and political vulnerability. And those are really probably, whether you're a larger council like Rotorua or whether you're a small council like Rotorua, those risks or those advantages, perceived risks and advantages are exactly the same. You all have those same sort of feelings about where we are going forward, the perceived loss of control, what's going to happen when that pipe breaks in Rotorua. Well, the way I'd probably see it going forward with the new identity with Waikato Waters, we're probably going to have the same water service delivery staff on the ground, living in our districts. They're just wearing a different T-shirt to what they wore last time. So they'll still be responding to the same events that are going on. That accountability to a different entity going forward. Community resistance, look, that's going to be there, but the only way we're going to overcome that is early comms, continual communications with your community, and telling them exactly what's going on every step of the way. And then the comms will also be what you do as a council yourself, but what you will be doing collectively. So you're ensured that you're telling the same story to the affected ratepayers and community going forward. Sage. Beyond financials, the real long-term considerations. The community connectedness, will ratepayers feel ownership? Does this model protect local voice? Kind of covered those a wee bit already. Operational effectiveness, can you attract and retain technical expertise? Can you meet regulatory expectations sustainably? Go back to that first one, can you attract and retain technical expertise? This is the issue that we would have in Rotorua if, let's say, Waikato Waters went ahead and we didn't come in at the beginning. How are we in terms of staff retention when my guess is potentially, I don't know this, but potentially they could be on a bit of a premium working for a large scale entity. The opportunity of promotion through that entity is far greater than what it would be working within Rotorua. And yeah, we know that the bigger entities seal it. We saw it, I think, during COVID, where a lot of local government staff disappeared off and worked for central government. They paid a premium. So don't ever think that your staff are not resistant to change or opportunities for working for different entities and bigger entities. And you've got Waikato Water just across the hill pretty much. And you've got Western Bay of Plenty and Tauranga and Thames Coromandel working together. So you do have some bigger entities working around you. So, yeah, there is that risk that you do have that technical expertise moving on. Regional leverage, does collaboration strengthen negotiating power? And does it unlock better procurement and funding? The council viability, does retain future borrowing? And what does it mean for council credit strength? And are you protecting future elected members from structural risk? Going to that first point, does retaining water limit future borrowing? No, sorry, it wasn't that I was talking about. It was about the strength of a council going forward in terms of that council viability. When we first tested this, my councillors all thought about what are we in terms of our water team going forward as a standalone entity with the financials are separate from what the council balance book is, still in there, but separate from the other council activities. The question for us is what is sustainability of our council going forward without water? And then there's a bigger question which we're not even sure. How well does it ask? What are your stranded assets and all of those points going forward? Where are we with staff that are at 0.5 that is kind of water and 0.5 is in other parts of your engineering department? How do we work going forward? What do the rates look like? A lot of questions to be asked. Those non-financial considerations for us, we tested those amongst our councillors, and when you take financials to the side and you start thinking about the other considerations, you realise that the CCO can actually potentially cover a lot of those questions that we have, and it can work for us going forward. Going back to the financial considerations, for Rotorua District, for the next 10 years, we are financially better off doing our water services delivery alone. So we had to start thinking, what are we 10 years, 20 years, 30 years out? So we can answer 10 years reasonably comfortably, but we're left exposed for the period of time after that. And that is where, as elected members, we have to start thinking about the bigger picture. It's not just 3 years, it's not 10 years, it's 20, 50 and 100. And that is really hard to get our head around at times because we tend to look backwards. We've always done it like this. What does the future look like?
You're giving us some real golden gems, so we might just pause there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question because you talked about, and I think it's a really good point that you raised. Say if we take the water out, CCOs established, etc. So that's the conversation that's been worked on and everything right now. But it's separate from the conversation around, well, what will be the role of local government in the future? I'm not sure because where's the parallel? Well, where's the discussion happening at the same time? Now, Mayor, I'm sure, will be able to enlighten me because it could well possibly influence a decision that we might take in terms of, well, that's will lead to the demise of the local voice in terms of higher council. Do you know what I mean?
I do absolutely know what you mean. Look, we're already faced at the moment with RMA reforms and local government reforms. So if we believe that we still can have 67 territorial authorities across New Zealand in 10 years' time, I think we're all kidding ourselves. I mean, there's from successive governments that there's been spoken about. And this is really, from my perspective, it's just my view, so don't take it as gospel. But this is a stepping stone on how can we work together in a more collaborative model, and what does a regional identity look like? And also as elected members, that we're elected to support our communities, but we do have to think outside of that as well. What do we think about New Zealand Inc? What does that look like going forward? We are only 5.5 million people at the end of the day, and it's, where is our scale of affordability? But you're absolutely right. I think we've got to learn in local government to be responsive and adaptive, and we tend to be fairly regimented in who we are as councils, and this is the way we've always done it. But change is imminent, and we've got to be prepared for it. So I think we've got to be we've got to be agile. We've got to be able to move with that change. And so, to answer your question, I'm not sure, but I think always be aware and keep listening to what central government's saying, listening to what local government is saying, staying informed, and as a council, being proactive and being ahead of the game.
And I will just also add, in the mayoral forums, these discussions and initial planning is starting to happen. But we think maybe in April, if the government confirms the establishment of the combined territorial boards, then there's 2 years of a regional reorganisation. And so that's a time frame we do know that within 2 years, that's where that wider discussion will happen. And I will just note, there's been a lot of focus in the initial local Water Done Well groups with the Eastern Bay councils about making sure that there's really clear community engagement, but that in our region, in particular with iwi and hapu as well, given the significant land ownership on and around our assets, and also the majority treaty settlements for our region as well. So we haven't started that discussion formally yet, other than brief updates, but that is planned to get that community connectedness.
Sure.
Any other questions at this point?
On your slide, Max, about the collaborative model and the potential risks, you've listed political vulnerability. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think as elected members, we're feeling exposed. We're making decisions that possibly won't get us elected back in if it's going against what the community is feeling as well. And I think, in all honesty, as the Mayor of Rotorua, at no point did I make a decision based around what the next election was going to be about. And it probably nearly cost me one election. Look, I stepped aside, so I never know whether I was going to get elected this last time either. So it could have cost me the last one. But I think it's making decisions that are best for the future of our districts is probably the more important thing. So yeah, we will be exposed, and I get really disheartened when I think and I hear that decisions are being made for your own political gain as opposed to what's best for the future of your district. Council viability, we talked about. Does retaining water limit borrowing? What does it mean for council credit strength? And are you protecting future elected members from structural risk? Next one. Intergenerational equity. Water infrastructure is 50 to 100-year infrastructure. Questions: who carries the risk? Who pays? Today's political decisions shifting burden to future ratepayers. and the scale reduce long-term volatility. So I'm not going to answer those questions today. These are questions you'll have to take away and start considering yourselves and talking amongst yourself and with the other councils, so you do come up with a common voice. And this is about legacy. Next slide. Engagement with mana whenua. This cannot be an afterthought. And look, I'm not going to pass any judgment because I don't know how well Rotorua Lakes Council engage with mana whenua. But as I said at the beginning, I know that I work closely with Maniapoto, and we made some big mistakes as council. And the one that I can think of that is most recent was developing our spatial plan, where we had a number of documents put together. The staff had done a great job and then went to mana whenua with the documents. My gosh, I mean, that put us back months and months and months, but we were told pretty dang clearly that you went about this the wrong way. The first move should have been the discussion, then start writing some documents and working alongside as partners right the way through. And as you well know, that has worked really well at times for Rotorua Lakes, and at times it hasn't worked so well when you've got it slightly wrong. So it's really important that we actually keep those considerations in place. So consider the co-design versus consultation, the governance voice, partnership expectations, cultural environmental outcomes, and treaty alignment. And if I think about Three Waters, which obviously I was a mayor of Rotorua through the Three Waters process, then we worked alongside the Waikato iwi chairs really, really closely. And then we moved on to local waters done well. Then the same conversation carried, but it was a slightly different conversation, but they were still engaged in those conversations going forward from there. Strong engagement reduces litigation risk, and we know that, and you guys know that. It builds trust and creates enduring legitimacy. Weak engagement politicizes the reform and damages long-term relationship. But again, I'm not telling you anything in that space. Navigating the political highway. From lived experience, reform becomes political when communities feel decisions are predetermined. So that's about that regular comms with your communities. That is the Rotorua Lakes comms, and it's also the collective comms. Communication lacks clarity. You don't shortchange the community on the detail. Councils appear divided. The reason why Waikato Waters went so well is because as the collective of mayors, so the mayors were the stakeholder voice on this one. So we were attending regular hui, having the conversation and taking that shared voice back to our councils. And we went in there with a high trust model. And if anybody lost that element of trust amongst that stakeholder group, then it was gone. It was really, really important that you go in there with an open mind, with trust, because I think everybody, whether it's standalone, it's just the conversation, but the conversation's got to be a high trust conversation. And fear is not acknowledged. So you let that be expressed. And even around the council table at times where I felt I may have been losing a bit of traction or we weren't getting the clarity, then call in the experts at that point. Ask the questions of, it could be me or it could be the technical experts, because that is really, we work alongside each other, and it's in parallel. My story is totally different what the technical guys are. I'm not a pumpkin head. I'm not going to tell you what the figures are or how it works in procurement working together. That is for the technical people to tell you that. Successful navigation requires transparent narrative, honest trade-offs, visible unity, and early engagement.
Just on the, because I think that's, we've had recent situations and lived experiences where there could potentially have been improvements. I think a key focus area of this council is like authentic engagement with the community and in particular iwi. But then it's also how proactive do we do that? So I've also heard from you co-design versus consultation. But like, apart from the iwi Chairs Forum, was there very proactive, like key messaging on why we're doing, like why this discussion's even happening? Were there like combined key messaging that everyone could share so that the community gets it? Because that's what's very difficult. I mean, we all have limited resource. It's a big piece of work that council's undertaking due to government reforms, but we're not resourced we're not resourcing any additional resource to do that consultation. Was there a proactive way that you guys went about that, or was it just let's go on the journey together and share with all of the people we represent?
So there's the opportunity for anybody to attend workshops. There's obviously the council was putting out comms in terms of mana whenua. They're on board really early, because if you think about Te Rohi Potai, which is Waitomo, Rotorua and Waipa, then Mania Potai were going, why aren't we doing this together anyway? So in that regard, it was very, very easy, because we're talking, this is not the case for yourselves, but we're talking about one iwi across 3 councils there. And then Tainui across the other councils, or a fair portion of them, made that conversation easy as well. So we would have meetings, and then we'd have our, within our own rohi, we'd have our own iwi leaders come in and we'd say what progress we're making, where we are at this particular part of the journey. What was really quite interesting, and I saw this in Kawerau the other day, is when they went out to the community and consulted, they had 107 submissions, and 103 of them were for standalone water service delivery, and 4 of them were against. We went out and we had, in Rotorua, we thought we did our comms really well. Now, read this either way. We had 4 submissions. Now, either the whole district thought we were doing an amazing job, but keep in mind, our farmers weren't affected by this decision either, the majority of them. Either we're doing a really good job, or our comms weren't up to speed. And we've gone back and looked at that, and we believe our comms are up to speed, but people obviously must have been happy with the decisions we're making at the time in general. Contrarily, we changed our council logo, and we had 220 signatures. And so it's amazing what catches the interest of your community as well. It can be something as small as the logo versus the biggest. And I actually, those people that talked to me about the logo change, I pointed out to them quite clearly then that your priorities are clearly wrong. This is the biggest decision we will make as a council in the time that I'm there in the district. And you're more worried about a logo which has no impact on you whatsoever. So I think the comms part, make sure it's really there. Invite the community in if those who are involved. Get staff to have the opportunity for, there could be a council event going on, or a community event that you'll have a stand-up stall there, and talk to people there. And that's what we did in a lot of different places as well. Things going on in the community, we're always open about that, which was, hopefully that helps you in some way, Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
Next slide. Yep. Lessons from Waikato Waters. What I learned, process matters as much as outcome. So we had to ensure that we're really thorough in what we're doing, that there's that constant engagement, that as councils we're talking together, and we were really involving the experts in that discussion. And I might add, with the 7 mayors that were together in the room, we had an independent chair. Because there's that fear, I had this real fear as well, that if we had one of the mayors chairing, that I know that you guys are rotating it, but if it was one mayor constantly chairing, then there could be that element of perceived bias, which we didn't want as well. So we wanted to make sure that it was really neutral, and that the mayors were sitting around the table as part of the group or the committee. Timing and sequencing are critical. Independent information builds trust. Again, we've got to keep the politics out of it. It's about what are the best decisions going forward. Community engagement must be genuine, which we just talked about now. Don't pull the wool over anybody's eyes. You're not going to get there. Political courage is required, but so is humility. And that in so many fronts, it's about, if we had, we look at Waikato District, or sorry, I like Waikato went with Tauranga, so not Tauranga, with Hamilton City, but Waipa was probably our biggest player just north of us. That could, if they weren't humble in this as well, if they didn't accept that, it affected the smaller councils like Rotorua and Waitomo as much as it affected them, then it was never going to work. But keeping in mind that for Waipa District, it was kind of important for this to happen as well, because they're such a high growth council, they were starting to hurt and they needed the borrowing headroom. For us, it was like, in terms of our future sustainability, we needed scale. So everybody had these different reasons for being a part of this Waikato water entity. The hardest part is not the modelling, it's managing perception, trust and confidence. Next slide. Questions we should be asking. What problem are we solving today and long term? What risk are we retaining? What capability do we realistically have? What happens in a major infrastructure failure? How will this decision look in 20 years? And that's always a biggie. Next slide. My commitment to you all as a collective and you as a council, I'm independent, evidence-informed, community-focused, experienced in navigating reform, respectful of local identity. I'm honest about trade-offs. My role is not to advocate a structure. My role is to ensure your decision is informed, is defensible, protects ratepayers, and protects future councils. And finally, in closing, the decision is not just structural, it is constitutional at a local level, and it shapes community confidence, regional relationships, intergenerational equity, council resilience. So when this year is coming to the decision time in terms of what Waikato Waters Limited looked like, so we went out to get, we used an independent to recruit or potentially recruit who was going to be on that first board. And I don't know if any of you know who's on the Waikato board at this stage. So the chair of the board is Melina Trout, and she's like well-respected and well-experienced governor. Jadine Kana, so she's kind of the Waikato influence in this as well, also vastly experienced on boards, and John Lamont. So they were the three. So they came on the board initially during this transition period. And also through the transition period, they'll elect two other board members in the next couple of months, I believe. What is interesting here is Alina came in as quite aggressive as a board chair to start with. But as a consequence of feedback from the councils that are involved, remember I'm no longer a part of this, so I'm just continually asking questions how Waikato Waters is going. She's backed off from this aggressive stance and is actually starting to take note of what the feedback from the councils are, which is really, really important. And I think those stakeholder groups feeding to the board is going to be a very important part of this journey. So I think, you know, the council still have a big part to play in what goes forward with this board, because they're the ones who elected the board to start with. But, you know, they're making a lot of move here, and we've got an interim CEO, which is Neil Brennan. And Neil's had vast experience in guiding organisations through transitions. So it'll be really good. I think, you know, we looked at this start with it. I think it's always going to be a wee bit clunky at the beginning if you do choose to go down this road. And that's always going to be the challenging part of it. So from here for you all, I think it's going forward when you've got your first collective meeting, next collective meeting on the 24th. It's about going in there with an open mind and thinking about what is best for the future, what is best for 50 years, what is best for our mokopuna. Because at times we tend to look backwards way too often, and it's really about using our imagination and imagining what change is going to look like, what does New Zealand look like in the future. But that is the start from me, and I know that I was on a bit of a timeline here as well. Any questions at this point? In the absence of questions, I'm sure the slideshow will be this PowerPoint put in front of you all. Go through it and think about those questions, put them through your mayor or your staff and get those questions back to me. And hopefully I can help navigate that, because I'm in constant comms with Waikato Waters Limited, and I'll be watching that change and what is happening here in the establishment of that entity, because the first council's come on board. We're only talking 4 months now. So that there'll be the real measure of what goes on, what that transition looks like. Rotorua doesn't come until July 27. And at this stage, Rotorua is looking at their decision-making progress, not too dissimilar to yourselves, how that looks in the future going forward as well.
Thank you. I do have a question. Having been a previous mayor for many years, Do you think if the model, a collaborative model, had been in existence 10 years ago, some of the infrastructure problems that we're having throughout the Motu right now, including your previous area, would that have been a lot less, the impacts of some of those significant weather events that have impacted our waters and what we had in place?
Yes, it's a question of if we look at what's happened across the country, I think there's still a lot of learnings in that space, Rebecca, to be honest. Like if we look at Papakura was one of the smaller councils that went into with Auckland with water care, and they still had a strong voice, and all those infrastructure builds and development that they thought was going to get forgotten. That wasn't the case at all. They got a lot of infrastructure built where they wouldn't have otherwise had that work. Wellington Water, there's obviously been issues down there, so there's learnings in terms of what a bigger entity looks like as well. And I think the greatest thing about watching others go first is the learnings that come from that. But what we've seen is a lot of infrastructure failures around New Zealand, and we are talking about ageing infrastructure. And I mean, yourselves as a council, you look at a 90-year lifetime expectancy of a lot of those pipes, and we do get the occasional blowout. It happened in Rotorua only a couple of years ago on one of our mains. You guys have had it with your treated wastewater, and you still ask the question, how did that happen? And it's not to say that that's not going to happen with a water main or an unexpected break on your main sewer as well. So it's being mindful, where are we, what's our capacity going forward, where we do have a borrowing limit. We know that a CCO does give you a higher borrowing cap to work with, but I think we've got a front foot decisions which we tend to put on back burner. I mean, New Zealand has been renowned for it, and Rotorua District was no exception, where everything was going out past that 10-year plan. We'll do that in year 11, but the year 11 never ever came. It has always been pushed out. And when I first became mayor, once I got my feet on the ground quite firmly, and we looked at where our infrastructure investment was in that 8, 9, 10-year period. It's like we saw this bell curve, but it was a bell curve that was getting incredibly steep at that point. And we made the decision as a council then to please bring some of those capital works forward so we could actually flatten that curve down somewhat from where it was going. So being mindful, we talk about intergenerational load. We can't keep on pushing out, and that is why the 30-year infrastructure plans came into place. So we couldn't keep on pushing out those. We couldn't be negligent about what our decision making was around the council table. We all want to keep our rates increases at 3%. We've just got to work out a way that we can keep it affordable for our going forward. And I don't have the answer for that.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you very much, and good to see you again, Max. Valuable experience you bring to the team. And you touched on the work that you've done with Waikato Tainui, who are very strong in iwi management, politics, and water and all that. And you having worked with Three Waters before, are they use or want to use some of the good that might have come from Three Waters into the new local water done well?
In terms of iwi, I think is probably the biggest, most rewarding part of the Three Waters was that drive to engage iwi right from the beginning. So to go into local waters done well and then be negligent of that relationship it's just a no-go. You don't go there. So in that regard, they just want to ensure te mana o te wai. It is about protecting the water all the way through. So I think when we're making these decisions here, it's being mindful of that the whole way through. Where are we going forward, ensuring that we're caring for our water? If I'm correct in saying that 60% of your potable water in Rotorua comes off iwi land, isn't it?
Yes.
So, you're working together already. And you have to keep on working together to ensure you've got that sustainable future going forward.
Thank you.
Greg?
I understand as a generalisation, the need to take political risk out of our three waters from where central government sits, looking at some of the poor results, understandable. What I look at being in this role, second term, looking around the models that are being employed, the CCO in Wellington gives me more questions about moving into that model potentially, retaining what we have and the results that's been achieved by this council and generations of this council and the relationships that this council has built over decades. Can you talk a little bit about how you envisage, from your experience, the governance oversight, the CCO model being stronger, better? Where do you get the talent? How do you, how would you give us confidence that that's a model that we should seriously consider, but allay some of my concerns based on what we read about Wellington?
No, and it's a fair question because I mean I look at what's going on down in Wellington, and you do wonder about the level of investment there. What I probably see from where I sit at the moment, with the encouragement from this government and the previous government for the I will use the term amalgamation of water service delivery, that if we go down collectively and have a conversation with government about the potential shortcomings or shortfalls going forward, there's a lot more power in that conversation when it's a collective voice. That's probably the biggest thing I see, that when we're talking to again central government about Waikato Water and the fact that it was seen as a great example of what could be achieved through collaboration. That's quite a strong, powerful business. Wellington, you've got 7 councils all talking together about where the affordability and the delivery of water services versus the likes of, I'll use my own, or trying to knock on the door of Parliament saying, hey, we've got a problem getting our water services across the board here. So that collective voice is going to be the big one. And then if we look at it, that is a bigger picture again of Waikato Waters, we're looking at Rotorua, Eastern Bay of Plenty as 2 voices working together as opposed to 11 voices talking individually. Again, that's where I see the potential change going forward. That is the advantage in that. And that is what I've heard. I heard it through the previous government and this government. They don't want to hear from individual councils. They want to hear from collectives. So, look, I understand your fears. I said there's no way for us in Rotorua that in 10 years we're going to be financially better off than what we are currently. But we had to make a decision. Where are we with, financially we made it better off, but could we retain our staff in another few years? What was the strength of our council left without waters? Can we still engage with the community? Is that ability lost because there's a big organisation running the beast? I think you can still keep going. There's still a local voice. I go back to Kawhia being the loudest voice in Rotorua, and there's less than 300 people there. So I think there's always strength there, and I'm just saying from what my belief is going forward, I think we're going to see shortcomings. We are going to see failures across the country. And let's hope that Wellington gets ahead of the game reasonably soon. It does surprise me, honestly, that it's the capital city and there hasn't been central government input into actually looking after the infrastructure of the capital of New Zealand. So,
Parliament,
yeah.
it really sits.
I think I don't want to jump in, but just on that point, I think it's worth noting, Max, and it'll be good to hear as you observe Waikato going forward what the lessons are. But Wellington Water is an exception in terms of it's a CCO that doesn't own the assets. So it's different utterly from the proposal that's most of the Waikato councils, particularly Tauranga, Western Bay, and Watercare in Auckland.
Thank you, Andrew.
We get to understand the nuances of that then, maybe for another conversation. I don't think my questions have been answered, but in time they'll need to be, from my perspective.
I think the interesting thing about that's going forward is for all councils in all councils, there's going to be a level of trepidation about what we're doing. Is this the right decision? As I said at the beginning, we've always done this, and for us in Rotorua, for us in Rotorua, it's always worked. It has always seemed to have worked. And why are we going to those lengths? Because there's one issue in the country, but that one issue caused a lot of people to be sick and caused a few deaths. So what level, and I think Tim Cadogan, talking on behalf of Te Mate Arawai, is like, what level and tolerance of sickness do we want going forward? And the answer is no, we don't want anybody sick about what we're doing. So how do we create a model that's going to best protect us all as councils? We're investing in the infrastructure to ensure that we've got long-term sustainability in what we're doing. Whether you guys can do it alone, at the moment it certainly shows that you can, but all it takes is a couple of hiccups and then the whole ball game changes. As Kaurau said, all it takes is a bit of an earthquake and things change. All it takes for them is a big factory to leave and things change. I think we've all got our own issues.
We've heard from our chief executive is that at some stage in the past too, in these discussions, that we are only one natural disaster away from potentially needing assistance and no longer being able to look after it ourselves. Councillor Kawate is another question.
I do have another question, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but I do recall when, first of all, when the Three Waters was being proposed, etc., and we're going back quite some years before it even hit the public domain. But Scotland, and they brought out, the experts from Scotland, and then France was held up, and so we started to look at modelling and what we could learn from there. But what has become evident that in Scotland and everything, the rundown of resource, the rundown of infrastructure, when it was certainly not supposed, when it was supposed to address that, and the expense that's been put on the local populations. And I'm just wondering, we're trying to do something different, but in your and you've been at it for some time, do we look at some of that international experience to inform us?
Yeah, probably haven't delved too much into it in recent times, to be honest. Obviously I was around as, through the Three Waters process, and obviously the Scottish model was spoken of really highly at that stage. It was used as a shining example. I think it is an example. And I really struggled to see how the Scottish example was going to work in New Zealand, just through the logistics demographics of this country, how it would work. And I can see it's interesting because we look at even a collaborative model, even if it's a couple of small councils work together. I've had Waitomo harping at us for years about we should amalgamate as two councils. And I'd argue, why would we? Because it's just bringing two similar problems together. And all you got is a bigger problem of exactly the same example. So why would you do that? You need the scale which Waipa would bring to us, even though their debt is higher. All these things, but it is that meshing together of the differences which created the strength, I believe. And I think New Zealand is different. We look at overseas as an example, but we will be setting our own example going forward.
Just have one question. You alluded to the board being elected by the councils. So is it then the councils who have the right to say you're out? So that's not effectively the local community having a say on the future of that board?
Well, they do, because the local community will make it fairly clear to their mayoral representative and the stakeholder group that they're not happy. And if that comes out quite clearly from a number of councils, then we'll see what that power to change.
So that you would say that there is the same accountability for that board as there is for us?
Yeah. And I think the difference, and no disrespect to anybody around this table, but you are bringing the experts into the table as well. And that there's probably a fundamental difference.
The technical experts, do you mean? The technical experts?
No, just governance experts.
Oh, yes, yeah.
We all, like I was elected as a councillor at Rotorua District Council. I had no experience. you know, I learned that over 3 years, and I was the mayor, and it's like it's the most daunting first 3 years of my life, I think, you know, trying to get up to speed there. So it's something you learn over time, and I think we look at the experience of these governors around the table, you know, that this is their career, this is what they do, and hopefully that there puts the whole organisation into good stead to start with. You know, we come and sit around the table, and we've got John, the neighbour, talking to us and saying he wants this to happen, and Susie next door saying she wants this, and that really influences our decision making at times. And I look at the mayor of Rotorua now, where you saw him, if you saw him on TV, and he was shedding a tear because someone had died, because he's so invested in the community that, you know, you start making. I'm not saying he's made any wrong decisions, but they become personal decisions. And at times it's really hard for us to step back as governors when we're so involved and engaged in our communities. It's way easier when you're independent on a board and you can make what is the right decision for the future of the water's entity, as opposed to what your neighbour's saying in your. I'm generalising. I'm sure none of you are influenced by that neighbourhood community.
So Max is going to be our independent advisor for our local water done well, and this fortunately is also funded by DIA as well. But once again, thank you so much for being here in person
So you're
doing that, so all our councillors get the opportunity to hear that.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Tanya. I'll be at the Hui on the 24th as well. So, like, I'll be engaged in this for as long as I'm wanted, and hopefully hear some real decent snippets of what's going on in Waikato. So, yeah. Hey, thank you for the opportunity of being here today. Hopefully it's certainly not provided any answers, but it's hopefully provided some questions, and it will simulate what should be going through this transitional journey.
And what I'll do as well is if any other councillors have a question that you think afterwards, we'll be in frequent contact with Max as well if that does come up. Are you going to cover this bit, Craig?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Max. I just want to introduce online. We've got Nick Davis of Martin Jenkins and Emma Merito of Martin Jenkins. They are the specialists that are helping the working group with the study, and they're going to talk to us a bit about that today and get a little bit on their the national context, the approach of the study, some strategic objectives, and I know those weren't discussed earlier as a wider group, but the working group's been talking about other things that line up with proposals that you should consider. So they'll want some feedback on that, and then also a little bit of talking about local view. You may have traversed some of the information they need in the discussion you've just had with Nick, so we'll leave it to Nick to take us through. Can you hear me, Nick? You there?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Over to you.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Nick Davis toko ingoa, ko hoa Pākehī Oi Martin Jenkins. Good afternoon, councillors. Pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today about the approach that we're taking to the technical assessment of the Joint Water Services Organisation options. So similar to Max, we've been on quite a long journey with water reform, having been involved over about the last 6 years through the previous government's Three Waters reform process, and then more latterly through local water done well. And for pretty much the last 2 years, we've been working primarily for local authorities, particularly through the Water Services Delivery Plan process. We worked with around 20 councils to help them consider their future service delivery arrangements, and as part of that we worked with 5 regions and sub-regional groups as well. As Craig said, we were asked to provide a little bit of an overview of what's going on nationally. I am, however, conscious of time. I think you've got about half an hour left in your workshop, and I think, Craig, you needed a bit of time at the end. So I thought perhaps the more important thing for us to do was to focus on the technical assessment itself and the strategic objectives we'll be using to to undertake that assessment. And I think you'll see a lot of overlap between what we're talking about there and some of the material that Max has already discussed with you. But can I just check whether that's whether you're happy for us to kind of skip that national context in the interests of getting to the study itself? And if we've got time at the end, I'm happy to kind of come back to that.
Yeah, I think that's prudent. Thanks, Mac, please.
Okay, thanks. So we'll just skip to slide 6, if that's okay. For this one. Yeah, we've been engaged to undertake the technical investigation. I think first thing probably for us to stress is that, it's not our role to stand in your shoes and to make the decisions. It's our role to ensure that when it comes to considering the options in front of you for future water services delivery, that we are able to support that with evidence, information and analysis to undertake that process. So we won't be advising you or recommending any particular model. It's our job to draw out, as Max has touched on, the relative advantages, disadvantages and risks of the different water services delivery models. So we're tackling that through a staged analysis, starting with an assessment of broad options. We will be undertaking some financial modelling as well to compare and contrast the different models, but also emphasise the same point that Max made, which is that is just one input into the consideration. And as part of our work, we'll be working with the Joint Waters Working Group to support the fleshing out of what a joint water services organisation could look like in terms of ownership, representation, governance arrangements and engagement mechanisms. So over March and April, we'll be developing the strategic case for change. That includes looking at current assets, their condition, current performance of water networks, and importantly, looking forward at what the future looks like in terms of the likely requirements for investment and the associated costs of continuing to operate the infrastructure sustainably. We'll also be running the ruler over a number of different models, and I'll sort of touch on what those are in a moment. As part of that assessment, we look to agree a set of strategic objectives, and they take into account the objectives from a community service delivery point of view, as well as the requirements of local water done well. And we use that framework to run the ruler over the options. And so it's important that as part of that process that we get buy-in to those strategic objectives, and that's something I'll talk briefly about today. Over in April and May, we'll undertake a more detailed financial assessment of the options, and as part of that, we will compare joint water services organisation options with existing in-house delivery on a like-for-like basis. So that financial assessment will consider the additional costs associated with establishing a water organisation, and it will also look at the financial benefits that come from economies of scale and financing benefits. And we'll work with the Joint Waters Working Group to develop and agree the modelling scenarios and the assumptions to underpin that analysis. Over May and June, we'll be working with the Waters Group to flesh out the key characteristics of the water services organisation option in terms of ownership, local representation, governance, and we'll put together a high-level implementation plan. And that is not to presume or prejudge your decision, but rather it's to help ensure that we can describe how our water organisation could work in practice to help you make informed decisions, but also to ensure that any subsequent community consultation is well informed. In July, we'll deliver our final assessment report, and in August, I understand the intention is to hold workshops with councils to present the findings and to support your consideration of the report. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, we'll just skip this one. It covers much the same territory. In terms of the options to be assessed, so the first option there is your current service delivery model. So under local water done well, Water services providers, including councils that deliver services in-house, will need to operate water services on a financially sustainable ring-fence basis. And in practice, that means that the costs of operating and investing in water services need to be met by water revenues rather than general rates. So this is the benchmark against which the other options will be assessed and will be consistent with the water services delivery plans that council has previously submitted. The second option involves setting up an asset owning water services organisation. So this is an organisation similar to Watercare, EOI and Waikato Waters. And under that model, the council would transfer responsibility for service delivery to the new water organisation. And that would include transferring ownership of assets, water debt and staff. And under this arrangement, council's role would change from delivering services to exercising influence through the setting of expectations for the company and through the appointment of board directors, and obviously through the monitoring arrangement as well. So there, the council's role changes from provider to owner. There's a third option here as well, which is a shared services or management only water organisation. And that option would involve setting up a water organisation to manage the services under contract, whilst councils would retain decision making about investment, revenue setting and pricing. And in terms of examples, probably the most commonly known example here is Wellington Water, which is a situation where they manage the infrastructure, but historically councils have made decisions around funding, and with the establishment of Te Aki Wai, that is a model that they're moving away from, but that's the best example of that currently. So in terms of, next slide please. In terms of looking across those options and assessing them, we are proposing to base that around the strategic objectives that have been discussed with the working group. And these are very similar to objectives that we've used in similar assessments previously. And they are intended to be holistic. So you'll see there, they're not only about the finances, they also relate to community engagement, ensuring that responsibilities to Hapu and iwi are met. They're about resilience to natural hazards and climate change and seismic risk. And they also consider the interdependency between water services delivery on the one hand and other roles and functions of councils. So this is something that we're wanting to test and get some feedback from you on today to ensure that broadly you're comfortable with these as strategic objectives and that there's nothing here that's missing of critical importance to you. So I'll just spend a moment just going over these in a little bit more detail before pausing for your comment. The next slide, please. So the next two slides just step through those strategic objectives a little bit more. They're on the left-hand column. And in the right-hand side of the table, we talk about how we go about forming an assessment against each of the strategic objectives. So starting with efficiency and financial sustainability of service delivery. Obviously, this has been a major driver of local water done well and was a key focus of water services delivery plans and DIA's assessment of those plans. The principles of financial sustainability and ring fencing are enshrined in the legislation and in the new regulatory framework. And in assessing financial sustainability, we consider a number of factors. We look at the projections of future water charges and ensure that they generate sufficient revenue to meet the full costs of service delivery, including operating costs, depreciation and financing costs. We also consider whether the water services provider has the ability to raise the borrowing and to finance the investment and generate the cash surpluses needed to service that debt. And we also consider resourcing sufficiency, and this touches on a point that Max raised earlier too, in terms of the workforce and confidence around having the resources required to sustain operational service delivery. In terms of protection of and promotion of public health and the environment, this is really looking at the assets and the capacity to invest to ensure that water infrastructure is able to deliver services that meet the drinking water quality assurance rules, as well as environmental requirements in terms of wastewater discharges, stormwater discharges, and the requirements of resource consents. And then the third box here, which is particularly important when you take a long-term view, which is ensuring that sufficient capacity not only to maintain existing assets, but to recover and respond to shocks that might occur through, for example, natural hazards. And we also look there at ensuring that councils and water services providers are still able to respond effectively to emergencies. Next slide, please. So the remaining criteria, the first one there is about ensuring that the option is able to continue to support integration of water services and broader infrastructure planning and district planning. So this relates to the relationship between councils' roles in land use planning, including planning for growth and urban development, and the role of the water services provider in managing network capacity and investing to support growth. Obviously, with separate water companies, potentially that introduces complexities here that need to be considered, and there are further changes likely in this area too as a result of the resource management reforms. The next objective relates to the delivery of affordable fit-for-purpose services, and that includes considerations relating to the ability to maintain adequate levels of service, as well as importantly ensuring that services can be delivered in an affordable way. And this also picks up the important dimension of ensuring that delivery models can provide for and reflect local voice and influence. We've also called out responsibilities to hapu and iwi as a specific objective, which includes how the delivery models can support giving effect to council's responsibilities and obligations arising from treaty settlements, as well as provide effective processes for engaging hapu and iwi. And the final strategic objective relates to the viability of remaining council operations. And that obviously takes into account that the models are quite significantly different between in-house and water CCO models in terms of the ownership of assets, where debt fits, and the implications for council financial sustainability. So as part of that, we also look at the residual financial position of councils after the transfer of assets, debt and revenue, as well as considering potential implications of things like stranded assets or stranded costs. So that's a pretty quick run through of the strategic objectives and the framework, but hopefully that gives you enough of a feel for the sort of considerations that would be involved. If you go to the next slide, this just has some questions that from our point of view, given that we're at the early stage of this investigation, it would be helpful to hear from you about. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you. Is there any questions or thoughts at this stage?
Just one question regarding the responsibilities to hapu and iwi. Is it anticipated that Māori land-owning entities are to be lumped in with hapu and iwi? Is that the anticipation?
That's the short answer, yes, yes.
Is that best form for us, I suppose? I just think of probably close to 30+% of the land in the district is held by independent entities who aren't necessarily iwi or hapu. We've also got settled entities who aren't iwi or hapu as well. So I wonder if that's a gap for us in that space. I just think of the Rotorua Lakes Trust, the Pukeroas, who are settled entities, but not necessarily an iwi or hapu.
Yeah, so our responsibilities don't change. Everything that's already there is a must do. and then it's what else gets added to it through the process. Have I answered that correctly?
We go over the engagement form further on. It'll answer a lot of those questions.
Any other thoughts for Nick?
Just a question on, I guess it's a technical issue. I heard the term must be ring fenced, cannot be funded by the general rate. And then it says in the presentation, water charges generate sufficient revenue and generate the cash surpluses required to repay debt as it falls due. What will be the mechanism to generate that revenue? Will it be water meters, or will it be just some sort of separate charge in the rates bill?
Yeah, so under the Local Government Water Services Act, there are enabling powers for water services providers to set water charges. And one of the key changes here is that whereas currently when you're sort of planning for the activity and also the investment associated with water services, that's all integrated within your long-term plans and infrastructure strategies. And as part of that, as part of the reforms, they will need to be sort of separated out. So instead of long-term plans, for example, planning for water services will be done through an instrument called water services strategies, and separate annual plans or separate financial statements will need to be provided for water activities. And related to that, there's also an expectation that financially, in terms of the revenue sources, that they are kept separate from non-water activities as well. So those terms are defined in the legislation, and as well as that, the Commerce Commission has the responsibility as regulator for overseeing those requirements. And so one of the factors there is that there is a requirement to move water charging away from rates-based funding systems over a transition period. And as well as that, there's a requirement for transparency around how costs are allocated between water and non-water activities. So there's quite a bit in that. I'm sure we'll go into that in more detail in the assessment itself, but that's a very quick answer.
Thanks, Stavros.
Thank you for that sort of the big picture stuff. I think you just have to sort of to get familiar with our own situation here too. The objective is quite simple. If you incur X level of cost to maintain the services, your revenues associated with the services have to match your operational maintenance and equipment costs. Then you ask a question, the methodology behind that, how do you get that? In Rotorua at the moment, we've got targeted rates for both sewage and water supplies. Water meters is an instrument, but it's not a policy matter. It's a decision whether the instrument you have in your hands is the best instrument or not. In stormwater, at the moment, we have a target rate for stormwater management. It comes from a general rate, regulation. But under this setup, we would no longer be able to rely on general rates for stormwater. We have to find a targeted rate and an appropriate methodology of defining what that rate should be. So I don't think people should get overly excited or concerned about the instrument you want to use. The underlying objective is actually to be able to generate revenue from the services that fund all their known and anticipated.
The reason I ask that is and particularly referred to water meters, is we've heard on numerous occasions that the cost of outlying that in Rotorua is just not practical. It's not worth doing.
Yeah, well, I think the business case, if you want to change, not you, if the entity wants to change a methodology, the instrument or everything that really needs the water meters, a business case has to be constructed along, to justify the reason for that. At the moment, it's our strong opinion that if you want to spend $15 million to invest in water meters versus $15 million some other activities, where water meter is not the highest priority, how we would suggest, and I would find it difficult in the future to see that water meter is the most pressing priority for such intervention. But again, we'll see how the future goes.
I think just to be clear, these provisions that they're referred to apply to whether you're in a CCO or not in a CCO.
Yeah.
They apply to everyone.
That's right. If a CCO decided that they were going to go down that path as a commercial entity, they would stand to reason that that investment would be passed on to whoever's using their services.
That's right.
So there will be a cost at the end of the day to the end user. Right. Thank you.
We'll put on that. Nick, have you got anything else?
No, not from our perspective for today. It's been helpful to listen into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I'm really conscious of time, and I'm actually even more conscious that we're going to talk about communications and engagement, and just about every meeting you go to, it's the last thing on the schedule, and we always run out of time, and we always say it's one of the most important things we do as a council. So I just want to hand over to Ingrid really quickly, who has stepped in to be the communications and engagement lead in that department, and then Kahurangi is over there as well, who's also working in the infrastructure team, specifically in the iwi engagement lens. So we'll let these two go and see how quickly we can get through. Yeah,
We can be quick.
Kia ora koutou, ko Ingrid Tiriana tēnei. So you will have received a document last week that outlines what we're looking at as our communications and engagement approach at this stage of the proceedings. As outlined in that document, I think you can move to the next one. Thank you. As we've outlined in there, we're proposing at this stage to continue leveraging existing channels that we have, existing communications and engagements that are taking place already to build awareness and understanding. So just trying to get that awareness in the community as much as we can ahead of the consultation and decision making. We've had a digital page on local water done well since December 2024, and we've continued to update that as decisions have been made and the legislation's progressed and that sort of thing. Updates at the moment on that page are aligned to working group meetings with summaries added to those as they after each meeting. We're including information in existing channels like our digital newsletters about this work. We are adding information to existing communications that relates to all sort of everything that's happening in the water space. There is a lot happening at the moment, so we're trying to sort of keep that awareness of all the things that are happening, including this mahi. And we're sharing information and having discussions during existing iwi engagements, which Kahurangi will talk about some more, like our protocol meetings. And we are working with our colleagues across the organisation to identify community events, the likes of community groups, youth council and other community youth groups who we can potentially speak to or provide information to about this work. So this is kind of ongoing with the aim to keep things bubbling along and keep it coming to the top, hopefully, of people's awareness. And we're also collaborating with our colleagues from the other three councils and looking at identifying how we can get aligned with communications and engagement. Obviously, we'll all be doing our own within our own districts, but also looking at what are the regional opportunities. And that includes things like the heads of agreement signing that we had here for the inaugural meeting that was worked on across the region. Kind of very quick outline of, so I'll hand over to Kahurangi.
So kia ora tātou, ko ora hau.
O kahurangi wai parsons aho, te kaitohu whakahono o infrastructure. So my name's Kahurangi White Parsons. For those that don't know me, I'm Partnership Advisor within Infrastructure. So we developed the iwi engagement plan. Now this sits on the side of the community engagement. We recognise the needs, the obligations, the statutory requirements in there. So we've developed this separately but distinctly to marry together under an entire engagement strategy. So specifically, we're looking at the plan strengthens the commitment to partnering with mana whenua throughout the local water process. It recognises te tiriti, the statutory obligations, ownership and co-management and partnership agreements we already hold. It ensures that our engagement is inclusive and flexible, culturally grounded, and avoids engagement fatigue. We recognise that the entities and individuals we'll be working with throughout this process are already heavily engaged with other council projects. So it's ensuring that that doesn't affect that type of engagement, the authenticity of that engagement. It directly aligns with the communications and engagement plan to inform, involve and listen, to use best practice engagement principles and to move away from traditional public meetings and prioritise accessibility and relationships. We have looked at structuring this through a tiered approach. Tier 1 will look at those that hold the statutory obligations, mana whenua with defined water governance, ownership or protocol responsibilities. These entities will require co-design, co-assessment and co-deliberation, not just generic engagement. They also hold statutory authorities, ownership or formal co-management, joint resource consents over drinking water sources with infrastructure. The tier 2 is iwi and hapu with recognised waterway interests, formal Rotorua Lakes Council relationships. They can be iwi and hapu with environmental management plans, environmental groups with land adjacent to water systems and assets, or entities with formal relationships, agreements or protocols with Rotorua Lakes Council. Next slide. Okay, there was a timeline in there. I'll just briefly describe that to you. So our pre-consultation, as Ingrid has already described, is all about informing. That's prioritising our tier 1 groupings, our partnership huis through protocol management and mechanisms that we already have within council, our advisory or working groups. The second phase of that is consultation. This is where we start doing targeted activities with our tier 1 workshops, with co-design workshops on local water options. And tier 2 is targeted one with drop-in facilities, maybe marae-based, and then digital engagement supported by the teams. And then our third phase is post-consultation with mana whenua. This is all about the wraparound and feeding back. It's about joint deliberation with tier 1 entities, cultural impact summaries and providing feedback to mana whenua, and then follow-up hui to confirm the preferred long-term options and recommendations, ensuring that our iwi hapu landowners are all taken along this journey. So, Tina.
Thank you, Kaho. I think just again the underlying objective here is that while we are progressing technical assessment, governance, financial issues, and so on, it's quite important for the community to be kept abreast, with all these, considerations, and then, so I think for you as elected members here, you need to be assured, I suppose, that we are actually proactively taking communication. Ingrid?
Yeah, we're keen to, I guess, get your confirmation that you're happy with where we're at the moment with the phased approach, what we're doing currently, any suggestions or ideas. Happy to receive those in another way if we're running out of time or any general questions.
And we're able to share that timeline that you had so that we can see how that fits in with the bigger picture. Yes, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, girls. Can you tell me about the tier 1 that's for mana whenua and the tier 2 for the iwi hapu marae meetings, but all the current protocol committees that we have, that's another
Yes, another avenue. Yeah.
I think that's important. Probably one of the things I think of my own couple. Now, you don't need with this whole lot of number, but they will join in the communication. So I think this is important. We get out to them. So thank you for that. And, I do support even your approaches that you have. Thank you.
Okay. I just wanted to point out when I was drafting this engagement plan, I specifically put it through tiers because we have to understand the considerations in the context we're working in. With 35 iwi entities, 17 settlements, 25 protocols, we have 2 or 3 joint consents for water, and we have 6 months worth of time to engage, and we don't necessarily have the capacity in-house to undertake that engagement in time alongside all the other water projects we're doing. So I just needed to raise that because that's actually a big risk and a consideration you should all be taking into account.
Okay, if there's any other feedback, maybe it can be fed back to through you, Craig, at the stage. It's mindful of time. So I know we've got the P and the next team ready to take over, and it's been quite a long day for the councillors. So Craig, that's the end of the presentations that you had. I see the information has been dropped into, so all the presentations are currently in there, as well as the plan, key messages. If you so thanks.